So some of you will know me. My name is Selma Turković, and I've recently returned from maternity leave. So this one, my first BMSEDG after a year or so. So today we'll be looking into the 2022 annual SHOT report, and our two lovely presenters from SHOT, Nicky Swarwrick and Vicky Tuckley, who are the SHOT laboratory incident specialists, will be especially looking into laboratory triumphs and also some talking points. So please feel free to ask any questions, or you can add any comments if you like. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for inviting us. So yeah, we are Nicky and Vicky. We do sound like some sort of crime fighting duo. If only it was that exciting in our lives.
Well, if only, Nicky.
So Vicky and I both share the laboratory incident specialist post within the SHOT team. So I think we're probably don't realise just how small SHOT is. There is just the one of us. We should share the post. So we're going to do our very best to give you a whistle-stop tour of the SHOT report from this year. And we're going to have some interactive sections as well. So if you have got your mobile phone on you, that would be great because you're going to need it. You don't have to take part. It's just quite nice. It's completely anonymous. There is no name or shame either. So it's just a bit of interactive fun to keep us going. So Vicky's going to share the slide set. So just move on whenever you're ready. Thanks, Vic. Okay, so hopefully over the next 55 minutes, we will explain to you about haemovigilance, what we do and why we do it. And what impact haemovigilance has on transfusion practice and ultimately on patient safety. Obviously, I'm aware that not everybody on the call is a transfusion base, so you might have lots of different backgrounds. So if you've got any questions at all, please do feel free to chip in. You don't have to wait until the end. I might not be able to see your hand raised, but I'm sure the team in the background can. We're going to discuss laboratory impact, so things, errors that we might make in the lab on SHOT reportable errors. We're going to hopefully look at the proactive approach to investigating when an incident has occurred, and rather than just looking at the human involved, we're going to hopefully look at the system as a whole and maybe what human factors were involved during that incident as well. And end on a positive, we're going to learn from some excellence in the lab because unbelievably, we actually do most things right most of the time. Obviously, SHOT are looking at a small percentage of where errors have gone wrong in the transfusion process, but by far, the vast majority of things go well. So hopefully we're going to learn from that as well. Thanks, Vicky. So for those that don't know who SHOT are, we are the serious hazards of transfusion, and this is just a slide to show you how we're made up. So we take reports from the whole of the UK for any transfusion reactions and any adverse events, and so that covers the whole of the UK, and then you report that to SHOT, and that includes any blood components. It also includes anti-D immunoglobulin and prothrombin complex as well. It's not just alone. We have lots of experts in the field who work alongside us, help us look at the reports that we receive, try and determine the primary source of those errors and any contributing factors as well. And those working experts tend to be exactly what they say, tend to be working in practice and help us look through those. Thanks, Vicky. And then the ultimate aim of that is we take a year's worth of data. So the most recent report was released in July, but it's for covering data from 2022. And we look at the data we've seen and we look for trends. We look where there's gaps in processes, and SHOT makes recommendations to try and fill those gaps. And we also provide lots of education along the way. Hence we're here. So thank you. Definition of haemovigilance for those who aren't aware. Effectively, it's a set of surveillance from anywhere to do with the blood component, all the way from collection from the donor, all the way up to the recipient, and anything that goes wrong during that process. Hemo being obviously blood transfusion, and vigilance to be aware of what's happening in that process. What we do is we collect and assess information where things have gone wrong to do with blood components. And then moving on to the last one, it's with the ultimate aim to prevent those errors reoccurring. Occurring in the first place would be the ideal, or reoccurring in the future. Okay, so how do you report to SHOT, and how do we get the information we do? So as if an error has occurred in the that may be in the laboratory, it may be out in the clinical area, that is reported to the transfusion team, and then the hospital transfusion team, the HTT, would look at that error and report it, probably obviously locally as well, but if it needed reporting to SHOT, that would be the team that would do it. You make a report through an online system, so it's called Sabre. You report, it's a one portal. You go online and you report the initial findings of what's happened, and that information goes both to the MHRA and to SHOT. Now, the way things are at the moment, obviously MHRA look after the legal side. They look after the BSQR, which is the Blood Safety Quality Regulations, and that is the law. And the MHRA look after that aspect, and that but SHOT work alongside, and so there are some things that are reportable to SHOT and some things that are reportable to MHRA and some things that overlap in the middle. So the report comes to both of us, one to SHOT, one to MHRA, and we determine if it's reportable to us. Hopefully locally you would follow that up with an investigation. It depends what it was and at what level you needed to investigate, but you would follow up the investigation, and that would be also fed back to SHOT and MHRA, and then we use that data to prepare an annual report. So we close the books effectively on the 31st of December every year, and then it takes us about 5 months to put a report together, and that's produced for July. So an awful lot of data there, and we'll go into how many reports we receive, but an awful lot of data to look through and look for trends in that. Thanks, Vicky. So this is just reporting timeframes. So effectively what you need to do is, if an error has occurred, you should really be reporting that on the Sabre system as a maximum really of 5 working days. I think MHRA would ideally like it within the first 48 hours, but they will accept up to 5 days. And that's just to make sure that that's this continuous information coming through. You can update it when you find out more information. Obviously, you're not going to know within the first 48 hours all of the things that have impacted on that incident or error occurring, but you can certainly build on that as time goes by. It allows us to look at for trends earlier on. Obviously, if somebody is looking at an incident and they're not reporting it until the very end, until they've completed it, then we're not going to see those trends. So we would really like people to make sure that they report early on and we can watch those trends. Yeah, and don't wait for the complete authorization, because some errors that are quite complex might take months and months of short-term, medium and long-term potentially corrective and preventative actions. Thank you, Vicky. Okay, so this is a slide to just try and give you an indication of how many units of blood are issued in the UK. And then when we go on to talk about errors, you'll see just actually, I know Vicky and are here from SHOT to talk about when things go wrong, but actually equally on the other side of that coin is lots of things go right. So there's just over 2.2 million blood components issued in the UK last year, which is an incredible amount. The number is coming down. You can see there was a dip during COVID and it's slightly going back up, but it's certainly on a downward trajectory. So an awful lot of units transfused in the UK. And then if you go on to the next slide, you can see this is supposed to represent, so the big red blob in the middle is all of those units, those 2.2 million units. And the tiny little speck of a dot is the risk of death. So unfortunately, people do die from following a transfusion, and the risk this year was 1 in nearly 64,000. So we are an incredibly safe system with really low harm in relation to the number of blood components issued. Okay, so this shows you that there were around 4,000 reports we received last year, and some of them weren't withdrawn from SHOT because they weren't reportable to us. They didn't fall into one of our categories. So there are 3,500 reports that we look through, and this is just an indication to show some of those are completely not preventable. They were completely unforeseen. So, for example, might be an allergic reaction, something you couldn't foresee and you couldn't test for. There absolutely are a proportion of those. So the blue ones are not preventable. The orange ones are possibly preventable, but unfortunately that huge big red section is all preventable errors. So I suppose on the other side of that is the red ones are the ones we can do something about. So they're absolutely where SHOT would get involved, and hopefully where the labs and the clinical areas can get involved to reduce those errors. The next one is the summary of all of the things that SHOT have received. So what SHOT do is we categorize it into different categories or sections, and that allows us to trend as well then. So you can see the big one, the very big one along the top is near misses. So what SHOT do is we also receive reports where the error has been detected before transfusion, because they happen much more frequently than when things go wrong. And if we include those, then we've got the potential to make a difference and make changes before a patient is affected. So the big one along the top is near misses. You can see there were over 1,300 near misses reported. And then going down, the next one is anti-D. So an awful lot of errors related to anti-D, both in the lab and in the clinical area. And then the next one is incorrect blood component transfused. So unfortunately that they are quite serious, and they include like wrong component transfused to either the wrong component on the wrong patient, and they also include where a patient received blood that didn't meet their specific requirements. And the next one down, you can see we also include here is quite a lot of febrile and allergic and hypertensive reactions. So there you can see they're blue, like we talked about on the left-hand side. They're not preventable. They are unforeseen, unfortunately, risks of transfusion. So we do have quite a lot of those, the not preventable ones as well. Thanks, Vicky. So a bit of audience participation. We're going to use something called VVox. It's just a quiz. You don't have to take part, but it is quite nice if you do. All you need to do is scan that picture, which I'm going to do as well. I might as well take part. And hopefully it should take you to a big white screen with a big blue NHS along the middle. And when we get to the VVox questions, it will ask you to either, there might be multiple choice, or there might be a word cloud, so you just need to add in a word. If at any point you're kicked out, you just need to Google VVox, and it will ask you for the ID code, which is that 9-digit number, which is on every VVox slide. You do not need to remember a 9-digit code. I would be the first to fail. Thanks, Vicky. Okay, so the first question, if you think about transfusion and where unfortunately a patient is severely affected, so we're talking about patient mortality here, what do you think is the most commonly reported cause of transfusion-related mortality, so where a patient unfortunately has died? So we've got transfusion-associated circulatory overload, we've got delays, we've got hemolytic transfusion reactions, and we've got transfusion-transmitted infections, which is a mouthful. Oh, excellent. I can see there's 106 people playing, so thanks for everybody joining in. Like I say, there is no name or shame. I'm not going to pick on John Smith from Birmingham to see what answer he put. It's just a bit of fun, really, that's all. We might not wait for everybody. Thanks, Vic. Excellent. So yeah, somebody's been doing some homework, definitely. And we will go on to the next slide to show you a bit more in detail. But yep, delays and transfusion associated circulatory overload. It is easy for me to say. So this is the transfusion-related deaths from 2010 all the way up to 2022. So you can see, unfortunately, that number is increasing. There were little dips in 2021, but unfortunately, it is on the upward trajectory. You can see that the big orange and the big red sections are the largest proportion of transfusion-related deaths, and they account for delays and TACO, so circulatory overload. So the big one at the top, unfortunately, so that was the first year this year that delays have attributed to most patient deaths. Okay, so this is the same set of information. It's just what we do is this, again, we colour coordinate it. So we've got blue was possibly related to the transfusion, orange was likely or probable, and over on the right hand side you could see the red ones are definitely related. So you can see, unfortunately, there were 3 that were absolutely definitely related to the transfusion. So talking about delays and delays being the biggest proportion of causing patient deaths, you can see that number is going up. quite steeply, and with it, unfortunately, goes the number of deaths related to that. So when we look at the reports and we think about all the contributing factors that have led to those, these over on the left hand side is you can see communication failure, where departments weren't talking to each other, logistical issues, just couldn't get access to the thing they needed to, or to get it to the right place at the right time. Technical issues tended to be related to fridges and things like that. Clinical decision making, not knowing how to maybe instigate a major hemorrhage, that often caused the delay. Sampling errors, not getting the right samples to the right place, not being labelled correctly. Not recognising that there's actually a bleed going on, that unfortunately is quite common in major hemorrhages. Insufficiently trained staff, so staff in areas that weren't sure of how to contact the lab when there is a major hemorrhage. And the last one is the component not in stock, because not often that leads to a delay, but sometimes that can. Thanks, Vicky. So when we looked at the lab, when unfortunately the lab had been responsible for that delay, there was around 30% of them were due to lab errors. And there was nearly 18% of those delays were due to needing to send the sample away to a reference centre. So unfortunately, that has built in a delay. So these are the ABO-I cases from 2022. So we didn't have, in 2021, we didn't have any ABO incompatible red cell transfusions. We had one plasma, but we didn't have any red cell. Unfortunately, this year we've had 5, and of those 5 red cell transfusions, 2 caused a patient death. So both of them were related to, well, in fact, all of the red cell ABO incompatible transfusions were related to patient identification or no patient identification. The 2 deaths, unfortunately, were related to collection error. So units were collected, the wrong units were collected, they were taken to the ward, there was no patient identification carried out at the bedside, and the units were given, and unfortunately that resulted in 2 patient deaths. It also resulted in 1 patient needing admission to intensive care. In short, we would class that as a major morbidity. And the only one that the lab was related to was the one on the bottom right, which we will go on and talk about in a second. But the lab issued the wrong group of FFP to a patient, unfortunately, in this case. So we'll go on and talk about that case next. So it occurred during a major hemorrhage. The lab issued group O FFP, so they picked O FFP out the freezer to an unknown group, which is obviously not the appropriate group when the patient's unknown. The patient was subsequently found to be a group A. The error was discovered while at the end of defrosting, and the emergency department were contacted to say, can you wait while we defrost some more? Unfortunately, the patient was in an absolutely life-threatening situation, and the clinical team decided that they could not wait those 20 minutes, and they gave that FFP anyway. During the investigation, it was identified that the BMS was tired and fatigued due to covering several shifts, and they were short-staffed. They'd had a lapse in concentration, and they were also working under pressure due to IT failures earlier in the day. And a further corrective action following on from this, there was that they created their own special allocated drawer for emergency FFP with AB FFP in there, and then they were hoping that would eliminate the error reoccurring. Okay, so another VVOX question. So which of these human factors contributed most to this incident? Now, there is no right or wrong answer to this. It's whatever you feel contributed. We've got staff fatigue due to covering multiple shifts, poor layout of the freezer, reduced staff numbers adding pressure to the remaining staff, or the IT failure. My VVOX has just said I couldn't join, so all you need to do is add in your number again. I suppose in the interest.
Seconds. I'll try to go.
I was just going to say, in interest of time, I'll keep going. Yeah, so I don't. Yeah, there you go. So people thought that the staff fatigue and reduced staff numbers, absolutely, they certainly played a part, and each of those added another layer of difficulty, didn't it? The staff were tired, they haven't got enough staff, so they're covering multiple shifts. The freezer isn't laid out very well, and the IT failures probably was just that final thing that unfortunately led to the error. Thanks, Vicky. Okay, so this is just looking at the last 5 or 6 years of ABO incompatible transfusions. There were actually 24 ABO incompatible red cell transfusions. Not all of those obviously resulted in a patient death, but there were 100-fold near miss events that included where the unit nearly got to the patient, where the wrong blood was taken from the wrong patient, where all of that was 100 times as many things. Thankfully, were stopped by having a good quality system, having staff who followed the processes, having staff that double checked, we'd having 2 samples taken and making sure that we do a 2 sample rule. So yeah, I can see a little comment there. Shouldn't IT flag up? It should do. Some IT systems are better than others, some IT rules are better than others, and unfortunately we do go on and talk about it later. Sometimes it's just you get so many alerts, you just keep returning through them. So unfortunately sometimes the systems are built and there are alerts, but they're just ignored. Thanks, Vicky. So it's just to say that the near misses are far outweigh where things have actually gone wrong, certainly reportable to SHOT. So it's really making sure that you look for those near misses and we call them good catches, and we investigate them and determine, right, we've had a lucky escape here. How can we make the system right before it does actually lead to patient harm? Okay, so I'll quickly go through these. So these might not necessarily be appropriate if we've got a whole range of different pathology backgrounds here, but effectively what we're saying is making sure that rather than just giving a blood transfusion, that you effectively manage that patient. If iron is a better option than a red cell transfusion and you've got the time, absolutely that's the right thing to do. Well-resourced systems, making sure we've got enough staff and they're adequately trained, and where possible introduce automation to minimise the effect that we might get it wrong in the lab or in the clinical area. And when things do go wrong, making sure you've got a system focus, so you're not just looking at when a person's done it wrong. Oh, it's John Smith on ward 49, he's always doing that wrong. Actually, well, what led John to do it wrong again and again? Is the things that are affecting John personally or in work that are leading to that? And learning from excellence, absolutely, we do things well most of the time, so it's learning from where we've gone right as well. Thanks, Vicky. Talking points, and now I will try and speed up. Okay, this is the last one for me. I think approximately what percentage of SHOT reports are due to errors that we make in the lab? So we've got 0%, 5%, 20%, 50%, or just shy of 100%. Excellent. Absolutely the right answer is, if we go to the next slide, is around 20%. So like I say, we get 3,500 reports that we accept, and 20% of those are reportable because of the errors made in the lab. So what Vicky's going to do now is she's going to go through what they consisted of. So I will hand the little baton over to you, Vicky. Thank you.
Hello, so welcome everybody. I'm going to go through a bit more of the lab data now and then go through a bit of learning from excellence. So when we make mistakes in the lab, what point of the process do you think that most of these occur in the lab? So I'll just open the poll and then I'll talk through the options. So is it at booking in, sample receipt and registration? Do you think they happen mostly at testing, mostly at component selection, or mostly at component labeling, this big one at the end? So that's everything from the point of putting the label on the bag of blood, putting it out to the clinical area, and in the fridge, and for it generally to be available for people. So I'll give 5 more seconds. No, we're asking you to make these decisions very quickly, but it's just a bit of fun, don't worry. Fab, most people, lovely, most people are in there now, wonderful. So this is a very typical response that we get to this question, and it might be interesting for you to know that actually most errors are made during testing, and you're quite correct at the component labeling step. So that doesn't seem to make much sense, does it, that the most errors occur at this place, but at least for our SHOT reports. But for things that are accepted by SHOT, it's errors that have been undetected, and then the component has made it out there to the clinical area and been transfused. So quite often when you make an error at booking in, there's the opportunity to spot it before it goes out there. But it is disheartening to see that the majority of our reports this year that I'll go on to were actually made during the testing step. And I'll talk a little bit more about the component labelling and availability step in a second. So this is our summary of the data from this year. So we had 431 reports within the laboratory. Most of them were made at testing, and they were mostly to do with the safe administration of anti-D immunoglobulin or patients not getting the correct specific requirements, followed by the component labelling, availability and handling and storage error steps. So they were mostly handling and storage errors, which makes sense. And then it led to delayed transfusions or right blood, right patient events. Then followed by component selection. And then our littlest one is actually sample receipt and registration. And we've kind of talked about that. So if errors occur at this stage, they're mostly they can be picked up. And it's also important to mention at this point, whether it'll affect any investigations with you guys or not, if a BMS misses, so if somebody's spelt, say, a name wrong, and it's booked in and they've missed that, within SHOT, we would not class that as a laboratory error, we'd class that as a clinical error because the first mistake was made in the clinical error area by not labelling that correctly. So maybe we encourage people to then take a step further back to say, if you improve the conditions for sampling, then you're going to get less errors overall. So that's just my little soapbox that I like to stand on. So you might have seen this before. This is our lovely transfusion 10 steps from SHOT. And basically, we've just broken down the process of transfusion into its little steps to help us categorise the data better. Within the lab, the steps that are pertinent to us are sample receipt and registration or sample and request receipt. And the kind of errors we see at these steps are that people have got information on limbs that you've not been able to access or you've not looked at, and it's made an inappropriate decision further on. So you've not been able to look in your clinical notepad and see if somebody had Hodgkin's 20 years ago, something like that. Or data was available on the request form or other IT platforms, and it wasn't considered for those for the next, I can't even find my word, for the next decisions to be made. And we also see at sample receipt and registration a few transcription errors, which is understandable. Testing, which is our big area, is mainly failure to follow the procedure, so missing out steps, not doing checks, not completing the testing before products and components are issued, using electronic issue when you shouldn't be, when the patient should be excluded, using a sample that's expired, so it might have been in date when you booked it in, but it's expired since then, or issuing things when you've not completed your antibody investigation, so you're getting the wrong results for your patient. Component selection, with these errors normally a failure to follow information that's available within the limbs or physically selecting the wrong thing from your environment. And component labelling errors, which is, until this year, this was our major area of where we had the most errors. So it's only testing that's overtaken it for the past couple of years. And not most of the errors at this step were cold chain errors. And there was also quite a lot of transposition errors. So if you've got, say, two components of the same patient and you're putting labels on them and you swap them around without realising. So this is really a key step within the process because it's the last point, it's the components under the control of the laboratory, and you don't have all these subsequent checks before. So if you make an error at this point, it's likely to unfortunately make it out. So this should be treated as a safety critical step. What we introduced last year was this concept of pause. So we're saying take 30 seconds, take a breath and check these things about your component before you get them out there. So it doesn't have to be somebody else, it could be the person who's doing it. So check the patient identification is correct, check whether everything's been authorised, whether all the investigations have been completed, check the unit number on your label. Does that match the number on your bag? Is it actually what they've been asked? Are you making any assumptions? Is this actually what the clinical area want at this point of time? And as the sample within expiry, is the component going to be within expiry from when it's going to be given? Lovely. So to illustrate some of these lab errors, we're going to do a case study and then we're going to talk about it a little bit afterwards. So we had a female in her 30s was found to have anti-K as part of her antenatal screening. And when they look back to figure out why she had that, she'd had 2 units of red cells post-delivery in a previous pregnancy due to active bleeding, but one of those was unfortunately big K positive. The LIMS did have an alert for all females under 50 years to say that they needed K negative blood unless it was an emergency, but it didn't actually stop the K positive blood being issued, despite the fact that there was K negative units in stock. The investigation found that there was a lack of knowledge in the recently qualified BMS about the requirements, and that recruitment and retention issues had been causing a lot of trouble. And there was also a bit of unrest in the lab because there were leadership issues and restructuring. So next question, which of these do you think would be a good corrective action for this case? So I'm going to open it now and then I'll read them out, and you can select as many of these as you want. So do you think that it's the learning that needs looking at? Do you think that the competency assessment for the task needs looking at? Do you think we could do with some more staff to help with training? Do you think you could do with some more out of hours support from that? I think this was made out of hours. The mistake was made, or do you think we need to be looking at our LIMS system? So I'll give you 30 seconds. That's optimistic, isn't it? I'll give you 10 seconds now to look through these and make your mind up. I like to see 2/3 at least of people going through before I kick you out. Wonderful, and I'm going to cut you off. Da, 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 dum. Lovely. So no right or wrong answers, but this is good. So they all are valid corrective actions to be taken place for this kind of event. And why we kind of brought this up is these are all wonderful corrective actions that were actually put in place by the trust involved. So you can see the benefits of good incident investigation, finding things like the fact that the training wasn't up to scratch, finding things like that there's too much pressure and the LIMS could have had better functionality. These are all things that could make a really good corrective action and then improve the service and the patient safety going forward. So talking about corrective actions, we can see here that there's a hierarchy of corrective actions, and some are better and some are slightly less effective. So, which is what is quite surprising to people, is that one of the least effective corrective actions is actually education and training of people. Most of the time people know what they should be doing, but the situation forces them to do something else. So these are actually less effective, and the most effective interventions are things like automation or forcing functions. So that's something that stops you doing the wrong thing. You can't do the wrong thing, it's not going to happen. But unfortunately, as we see, there is more time and investment and effort involved with the more effective ones. So it tends to be the less effective ones that get put in place to start with. Not saying that they don't have their place, but just for people who do incident investigation to be aware, it's the more long-term solutions that can actually get to the bottom of the problems. Talking a little bit more about laboratories being under pressure. So we saw that in that case study that BMS was working. They were very tired. They didn't know what was happening. They didn't know whether the job was safe, and they would not had enough training, and it was a bit of a pickle, wasn't it? And within our lab reports this year, we've really seen some trends to do with the additional pressures that are on laboratories to do with staffing and training and how they are contributing. So we're seeing an increased workload that's mismatched with the staff. I'm sure you'd all agree with that. It's very tricky at the moment. Unfortunately, staff are coming in and not actually knowing why the process is being done. So they're knowing how to do it, but then when something unusual happens, it's that underpinning knowledge that really needs to be there. This is compounded by the fact that we've got vacancies, and so when lots of people come in, there's more training to be done, so there's more gaps where there's less people, and then more people to be trained, and the staff delivering the training, unfortunately, sometimes having to do that without having that knowledge embedded themselves, so that kind of perpetrates errors going on. But that's also because there's no time to do specialist qualifications. And the staff need time for extra training when they're appointed, then that makes the staffing issue even worse. All underpinned by the fact that we don't feel like the undergraduate degrees actually have enough transfusion theory in them. And during people's registration year, they don't often have enough time within transfusion. So it is a bit of a pickle at the moment, and we're aware of these errors, and this is actually what we're seeing in the reports at the moment. Hopefully to help with this slightly, or help guide labs with this, and we've got an organisation, I don't know if everybody's aware of, called the UK Transfusion Laboratory Collaborative, and it's the collaborative of all the interested parties to do with transfusion in the UK. There's just a few of them up there for you. We've also got input from lots of lab managers from the military, from UCAS, so it's a really big collaborative. If you scan that QR code here, it takes you to the abridged standards that are going to be out in full soon, and what they do is They kind of set out the minimum staff qualifications, training, IT systems and culture that should be in place for a functioning lab. And they can also be used because the standards for the MHRA to kind of get to benchmark against when they come in. If they find something wrong, they'll say, well, why aren't you following the UK TLC? So they are there, they are worth looking at because they do give you a bit of teeth if you need to ask for more help. So more a little bit about effective interventions and what would be a good thing to do when an error occurs. So I want people to be looking at the process. A process should be, I like this phrase, I've stolen it slightly, as simple as possible, but as complex as necessary. Okay, so it needs to do what it needs. It doesn't need to take you on a merry tour for it. It just needs to do what it needs, and it needs to be fit for purpose. LIMS and automation can help if they're used properly. We don't want people to rely on them all the time. They need to be an extra barrier, but where they're used safely, they can really help things. SOPs need to be clear and concise and actually say what needs to be done. They need to let you know what to do if things don't fit these circumstances, and they need to be reviewed. Training needs to happen for new staff. And it should be followed up to make sure that people actually know what's happening and don't get it once and never again. We need to revisit these things. And if you have a checklist, it needs to have an actual purpose, actually reflect what's going on there, and help people to have a think about it as they're going along. So when you've put one of these interventions in place, we need to review the effectiveness of them, and they're quite self-explanatory there. So I'm trying to pick up the pace a bit now. Yeah, so we just need to revisit them and see whether they're actually making any effect. So I'm going to quickly go through a case study now. So we've got a group OD positive male received a transplant, but we've had a group O platelets in error. Oh, sorry, I've gone backwards. There were LIMS alerts, but unfortunately they weren't very good, and the process relied on the person actually knowing how to get around it. They're also multitasking, rushing to get their work finished. And there was the workload management had been discussed with the transfusion lab team, and the limitations within the LIMS have been escalated. So that's what the site itself did about it, when unfortunately this patient received the wrong blood group of platelets. So what they've done about it, they said, think about your workload, and they're looking a little bit about the LIMS. Are there any other further corrective actions that you could think of that could be put in place for this case? And so this is a word cloud. I want your ideas. There's no silly answers. There's only good ideas and things to be looking at. Oh, we've got a brave person. That's very good. That's exciting. I like a brave person. 2 brave people. Don't worry if you don't have any particular thoughts or opinions on this. I'll give you 5 more seconds because we are running a bit shy of time, but then we'll crack on again. Lovely. 10 brave people. Wonderful. So hopefully my word cloud's going to work. Lovely. Training, education. Wonderful. Upgrading LIMS. More staff. Wonderful. Training on the platelets. Yeah, people actually know what they're supposed to be doing. A second checker. That's a good idea. More staff. More. I think so. These are good ideas. So for people to, we think also on the same kind of lines that we're thinking that, rather than somebody being told to manage your work properly, where they could have been rushing. Maybe if you had more staff, they wouldn't be rushing to finish staff at work for the next shift. They wouldn't be multitasking so much. And yeah, it's not a very good LIMS, that is it, if you're having to have a workaround. And training, yeah, if maybe put that in your SOP if it's a convoluted process rather than somebody just having to remember. So these are really good. You've come up with some good examples there that are looking at the system rather than the person, which is fabulous. So my last little bit on IT here, within SHOT, we have the script group, and what that is people who are interested in IT, and we're trying to pull everybody to do with IT and transfusion together and try and make things a little bit easier for people. So if you scan that QR code, it should take you to the script website. And what we have on there is the results of a couple of surveys that we've done for labs and for the suppliers to figure out what's happening in LIMS. And what the good things for everybody really is there's lots of resources. So we're getting people to put examples of things like their business cases and presentations and things like that to really help to see where IT can help with transfusion, because unfortunately 13% of all SHOT report incidents contained information technology elements. So this is an area that's something that can help us, but it's got to be used properly. So how can we use IT properly? So it must be set up correctly. It must do what we want it to be doing in the first place. It can introduce new errors though, so we need to really validate it and look at it properly and assess where it's going to be good and where it's going to be bad before we make that decision. Don't introduce it for the sake of it. Don't introduce a new alert that means nothing. Okay, it's got to be it's got to mean something. Otherwise, people are just going to go tap, 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 tap past them because it becomes so normal and you're going to introduce error. So we want people, oh, it's gone next. I must have hit that then. So yeah, it got to be set up properly and it's got to be appropriate. They must be understandable and actionable, our alerts. So they must have we're thinking maybe have them tiered so you know what's happening with them, how important it is. Systems need to talk to each other. It's moving by itself. This is freaking me out. When IT isn't there and when it's taken away, when it breaks, people still need to be trained in the manual process. And that's somewhere that we've seen quite a few problems with. So it should be an additional safety step. You shouldn't be the be all and end all IT. What we have launched this year as part of the script group is this lovely fancy snazzy document. So this has the 10 steps of transfusion, and against each step it has how IT can be helpful at that step. So that's good if you're particularly having an error in a specific area and you want to address it. And then it's also arranged by system. And so we're hoping that'll help people if they want to introduce a new system to then look at it and figure out how it can be helpful and help with those business cases and things like that. So I'll reiterate myself again, but having transfusion IT in place doesn't take away the need for having knowledge and skills. It should be a helper. It shouldn't be the doer. So our lab key messages following all of that whirlwind of lab business. Sensitization to the K antigen in patients of childbearing potential is preventable. We keep seeing this. It's been in the guidelines for a long time and it can have devastating consequences. So we really need to make sure people are up to date on what happens with the K antigen. People are too busy and it's making people make errors. So please escalate that. I know it's hard. I know you're constantly saying it. And I know that there's a problem sometimes getting proper staff, but it needs to be on risk registers and it needs to be recognised. Electronic systems, additional barrier, done that one to death. And final checking of the unit prior to the issue is essential. So we're saying maybe use label verification systems, they're out there, and using the pause checklist might help you get these things under wraps a little bit. Key lab recommendations from all that. So we've talked about this a bit more, so we really think people need to know about why they do something before they move on to the how. If you look in the 2019 SHOT report, we had a model in there called uptake about competency assessment. So that says instead of just assessing what you do, please be assessing if people know why they're doing it, know where to look for exceptions and know the limits of their responsibility in there. Provision of K negative components is essential again, and Nicky's talked about major morbidity, but if somebody gets sensitized to K antigen shot, we class it as major morbidity because it can have devastating consequences on the future pregnancies. So please make sure that it's treated with that appropriate respect, and staff who provide training need to have knowledge themselves, which makes sense. So I'm going to take a quick step here. 1 second, please excuse me. And we're going to go on to the triumphs, which is much nicer. It's a much nicer section to present to you. What we're on Q2, we can get this sorted. Okay. So we're looking at a bit of good practice here. So controversial slightly question. What is your opinion on learning from excellence? Have you heard of it before? Do you have an opinion on learning from excellence? So do you think it's really good? Do you do it regularly? Do you think it helps people, but you've just not got enough time to do it? Do you think it's something you just rather not have on your plate? Or do you think that it's a bit useless, really? There's actually no real world benefit to learning from excellence. Excuse me. And you're all very comfortable that you're anonymous now. So I think we'll see what responses we get to this question. Fab, nearly there. 5 more seconds. Have you got any thoughts and opinions? 3, 2, 1, and closing it. Lovely. Oh, lovely. Okay, that's warms my heart to see that most people think it's helpful. Nice to know that some people have got time to do it, and I'm not surprised that the majority of people like to do it but don't have any time to. And I admire your honesty for the last 2, and hopefully I can change your mind in these next few slides or just plant a seed of thinking about it. Yeah. So As well as learning from excellence, we can learn from everyday work. And what would be the benefit of learning from everyday work? So it actually improves performance and well-being, and it can be applied without having any additional resources. It doesn't require unwanted events. That's a really good thing. You can learn from something, you can improve something without a patient having to suffer to start off the whole process. It can build on what's strong. So if you look at what's already happening, what's good, you get the benefit of something's already there. So you don't have to start from scratch, which is wonderful. It helps you to see changes that are happening slowly. So if you look at what's happening and you see how it's slowly developing, it's a really good way to see it. It can call practical drift. I've written in my little notes there, and it can slowly move away from the unexpected, and it can happen in positive and negative ways. So it really helps you see what's happening here. And it can involve everybody. It doesn't just have to be from the top. Everybody can get involved with learning from everyday work and learning from excellence. So if I've still not convinced some of you, I'm hoping to hit you with the science here. So we've got a couple of studies here that show that recognition of good work improves morale and performance. So the first study that we found here was just a little study, but they had some letters that were sent to social workers to acknowledge the good work they were doing. There was two groups, some had a letter, some didn't. Those who received, the other one just said, I don't think it was as positive, but they just had a letter out. Those who had a letter felt significantly more valued, recognised for their work and supported, and they actually improved their well-being, sickness and absence rates as well, and the motivation to do work. So for improving sickness and absence rates, hopefully that's winner number one. And the other study that we found here has actually found that if people were motivated and they were recognised, that actually increases the motivation to work, and the performance, their actual outputs get better. So the work that is done is of a higher quality. If that can't convince you that rather than it just being nice to tell somebody that they're doing a good job, it actually has real world benefits in there. So that's my little soapbox. I love learning from excellence, and I'm going to take you through an excellence case study now. So we had, this is, and just saying that we're doing this because I know you get an awful lot, and like Nicky said at the start, shot is all quite often about errors, but everybody does a fantastic job every day. So it's just showing how you can improve and save lives. So BMS in this case had a mixed field result with a group and screen for a patient who was pregnant. And they thought, this isn't right. So they contacted the clinical area to ask for an additional sample. But at that point, before waiting for the additional sample, they told the clinician that they were a little bit unsure and a bit worried about this large mixed field, which was, I think, in the D well, that it could have been a fetal maternal hemorrhage because the patient was pregnant. Raised the alarm at that point. Patient was actually brought back into the hospital and they had a scan. And the results were quite suspicious, and the baby was actually delivered early. The baby was very unwell and needed a red cell transfusion. If the BMS hadn't noted this and escalated it in such a prompt manner, the mother might not have been reassessed. Note that at that point, as far as we're aware, there was no other reason for the mum to be back in hospital, and the baby might not have been successfully delivered. So this is wonderful life-saving work from that BMS. Within the organisation, there is a GRATIX report. So it's like DATIX, like incident reporting, if you've never heard of it, but it's just a way of saying, well done, people instead. And they also acknowledge them throughout the pathology network, which is lovely to have that wide recognition and pass on the learning. So can you think of any other ways to acknowledge and share excellence? I've given you another word cloud here. But if you've got any ideas, great. If you haven't, don't worry about it. But we're all about sharing excellence and getting people improving practice by looking at wonderful practice. While this is open, I'll tell you a little bit more about ACE. So SHOT have got the Acknowledging Continuing Excellence chapter. Please submit reports to ACE. So you do that the same way that you submit a report through SABRE to SHOT, but it doesn't actually count towards your SHOT figures for the year. Personally, I don't mind how many reports you're reporting as long as you're finding errors and investigating them and doing what you need to be doing, but it doesn't count towards your figures if that helps. So please submit your ACE reports and share the learning. So I think we're at a plateau here. Wonderful. How else do you think we could share some excellence? Oh, lovely. Oh, somebody thinks sausages. Wonderful. Great. Fine. And that must mean it's a big one. A couple of people think sausages. That's fine. But yeah, telling people in appraisals at weekly meetings, this is good. Compliment boxes, wonderful. In reviews, a wow wall. I like the sound of that. That sounds lovely. So I'm assuming that's somewhere where you stick things up and say, well done. Presentations, bonuses. I like that idea. I have no power to implement that idea, but I like it. And newsletter awards, they're all wonderful ideas. So hopefully it gives some inspiration to get out there and start sharing some more excellence. This is within the SHOT report. This is these were some ideas that we came up with. Sorry, it's a bit small there, of how to share things on different levels and the benefits. So yeah, telling somebody is the most simple way to share excellence, but actually improves morale, and people are more likely to repeat the behaviour if they realise it's a good thing to be doing. Within departments, some places have created a role just for innovation, which is a good way to go. I know not everybody has the ability to do that. That was an outlier, shall we say, but it's a good thing to be doing. If you maybe look at your contingency plans and policies and procedures, if somebody's gone above and beyond and done something fantastic, can you make that normal? And that improves everything for future patients and helps embed excellence in everyday practice. Hospital-wide, if you can let everybody know within your hospital, then it might impact another area. They might have had the same kind of issue and not really thought about it. Taking things, and these are a bit more aspirational, but obviously taking things to your regional network will be good. It'll affect a lot of people, and it helps things within a region all go along the same line. So that's wonderful. And nationally, it's lovely if you can share things by submitting abstracts, by reporting to SHOT on the ACE, and that just has a benefit all over and shows what good ideas and the impact can have. So I'm wrapping up my little section now. I'm just trying to say that if you want any more resources, the SHOT website have got loads on there. If you want to learn about transfusion, particularly I've directed towards these SHOT bites, which are 2-page summaries on certain topics. We also have on there educational webinars, educational videos, some nice little email signatures like the one at the bottom of the page, and loads of educational stuff. And our email is there small, but if you ever want anything, just contact us on shot@nhsbt.nhs.uk. So thank you for putting up with that quiz. And ending and everything is a big thank you to you. Thank you to everybody who report and share their instance, because even though it might be a burden at the time and it might be a little bit not maybe embarrassing, but it might be a big thing to underdo, and it's a big thing to undertake and to acknowledge, and it really does help everybody on a national level. So thank you for taking the time to do that. So that is the end of our presentation. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thanks so much. Huge thanks to our SHOT duo today, Vicky and Nicky. Having a snapshot of such a huge piece of work is really valuable. Also, huge thanks to all, I think 195 of our BMSEDG members in attendance today who've taken the time away from the labs, the wards, other clinical areas, even your sofas, BMSEDG today. As per usual, boring bit of post-close housekeeping. The certificates for your CPD portfolios will be sent in approximately 7 days to those who have completed the session evaluation form, which I'm going to pop in the chat now as well. I'll also share a slide at the end with the QR code. All of our sessions are now routinely recorded, and this session will be made available on YouTube in the next few weeks. If you've got any colleagues unable to join today due to IBMS Congress or work commitments, rest assured they can catch up at a later date. So we'll meet again on the last Wednesday of next month. That's Wednesday, the 25th of October at 2 p.m. UK time. And that'll be for some case studies with Sarah Lewis and Nikki Wilkes of NHSBT's Red Cell Immunohematology team. Lovely.
Thank you, guys.
So I'm going to pop up a slide with a QR code to the evaluation form as well, and we'll keep that there for a couple more minutes. But feel free, Vicky and Nikki, you can get on with the rest of your afternoons if you need.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you so much.
And the door to SHOT is always open. Yeah,
yes.
So there's lots, we are a small team, so please get in touch. I think people are often a bit scared of SHOT and MHRA, aren't they? But you can't be scared of me and Vicky.
It's quite tricky. Lovely. Thank you, everybody. Have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you.
Guys.
You too.
Okay,
Thanks.
bye.
Thank you.